Hello, this is Chris. Hey, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. All of a sudden, my audio just completely died. I had to restart my computer and everything. So, oh, no worries. Um, yeah, so s- mhm, mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess kind of more where I was going was like you're with the change too in like your role and getting out, you kind of don't want to necessarily be like pinned down to like a place at the moment. You want like kind of more flexibility that like maybe and I could be wrong, maybe like rent is the plan to rent for a period of time, or you once you sell this you're going to buy something else. Hmm. Yeah. Okay. Got it. That makes sense. Um, okay. So in an ideal world, like what would be the result for you? Is you sell the house, I think based on where you're listed at currently, after factoring in like the general rule of thumb is whatever you're listed for, whatever offer you get for just like a normal traditional offer, you're typically gonna pay all in, with commissions, closing costs, buyer requests for repairs, concessions, home warranties, interest rate buy downs, all that stuff packaged together usually comes out to about 10%. So, if you were to get an offer, right around where you're listed, you'd probably be walking away with somewhere in the neighborhood of like 740. And then, of course, how much do you still owe on the mortgage? 560. Okay. Um, okay. And yeah, so I guess in an ideal world, like how would the situation play out for you? You just put the cash in your pocket and then move on, or um, mhm. Yeah, sort of, right? Because, like I talk to a lot of people, right? And sometimes it's like, well, I need to sell this house and whatever equity is in it, I actually need that to go literally within the next 30 days to put down for a down payment on my next house. And that's what I need those funds for. Or like, oh, I've got a bunch of credit card debt. I'm trying to pay off all that. And then I have other situations we're like, no, I'm just tired of being a landlord. I don't really have a destination for these funds right now. So yeah, it's just for all intents and purposes, it is just going to go into a bank account and sit for a period of time. Might do something, 2 years from now or 3 years from now, right? And the reason I ask that is because kind of a lot of people generally in real estate, the focus is like, what's the problem that's right in front of us? And more often than not, it's less about that particular problem. And when we start to think like 2, 3 steps ahead of that problem, there's something else out there that if we can resolve that, it kind of solves the problem that's right in front of us, if that makes sense. So yeah, so I mean, is there like a plan for the equity that you have like immediately? Is there a timeline that you have to like get that out to be able to do whatever you're going to do? Yeah, I guess so. So I had mentioned earlier that, one of the things that we specialize in is like creative options. And so your situation is a little bit different than the situation I'm going to explain. But my wife and I, we just bought our primary residence here in San Diego, literally just closed like 2 weeks ago. And the situation is somewhat similar to the situation you were in. The seller was in the military, had a VA loan. They bought the house 2 years ago, I think it was in 2022. And they had listed the property, had been on market for going on 100 days. And, of course, like everybody, they listed at, what they really want for it. And then they reduce, reduce, reduce. Well, it got to the point where if they reduced any further, they weren't going to be able to they were going to have to write a check to sell the house because they didn't have any equity. And I know that's not your situation here, but they obviously didn't want to do that. Nobody wants to write a check to sell their house. So what I was able to do is, and they had been in escrow like 3 separate times and it kept falling out because the roof needed to be replaced and nobody wanted to take on that burden. And so I was able to come in and actually offer them more than what it was even currently listed for, um, to be able to take over their mortgage. So my wife and I got the benefit of their interest rate that they had gotten a few years ago, which is obviously better than interest rates today. And then I was able to put some cash in their pocket. So that was one thing. And I know you're probably thinking, oh, yeah, assumable. We actually didn't assume the loan. We did what's called purchasing the property subject to the existing mortgage. So it's similar but different. Okay. Um, and now the biggest difference before I go on, does that like you track in that whole situation? Yeah, no worries. No worries. Kind of the structure of like just somebody taking over the mortgage, right? And how that kind of works. Okay. Okay. All right. Got it. And just to be clear, there is a distinction between doing a VA loan assumption and a subject to purchase. So it's a little bit different, but overall, like the end result, the net result is very, very similar. Now, in your situation, you actually have equity. And so a scenario that we've done with other sellers in the past is, you know, they had a number in mind that they're like, I really need to get this number. I really don't want to keep reducing. I want this number. And I'm willing to, do whatever we got to do to get that number. That's the most important thing. For us as investors, we look at it through the lens of, okay, well, how can I monetize this asset? And so I would be looking at this through the lens of, can I take this on and take this as a rental that will perform for me, where I'm in a position to kind of carry the burden of, the turnovers, the maintenance and all those things, but obviously I need to see a cash flow, right? Um, and I don't know the answer to that quite yet. So couple questions I have for you is, what is your current monthly mortgage payment? Between 32 and 3,300. Okay, got it. And that's all in PITI. Sorry, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Okay. Got it. Okay. And there's no HOA, right? Okay. Got it. And okay. So, all right. And then like I kind of broke down, if you did get an offer around the what you currently have listed after all the commissions and everything, you'd probably net about what I say 740-ish. Does that sound about right to you? I don't know if you've talked about that with Bo. Okay, all right, got it. So you're basically looking at about $180,000 of equity. Okay. So what we've done in situations like this is we've actually done, we just call it a hybrid transaction. So loan assumption subject to is taking over the mortgage payments, right? Somebody owns their property outright and we make them the bank and just make payments to them on their equity. That's seller finance. When you have a situation where there's a mortgage balance and there's some equity and you're combining them, we just call it a hybrid transaction, just to make it simple for conversation. But essentially, what we've done in the past is we've structured deals where we come in, we take over the mortgage payments on the property, and then we structure some sort of terms on the seller's equity to where they're getting a monthly payment, maybe a little bit up front. On that equity. And then typically there's like it's usually like a 3 to 5 year time period where at the end of that time period they would get ballooned out, their equity or something along those lines. I mean, but we can structure it however we agree to structure it, right? So that's kind of where I was getting to when I was asking about, like, is there a timeline where you're like, no, I kind of need this, in 36 months I need the equity because that's when I'm going to buy a house or a rocket ship or what, whatever. So, um, yeah, yeah, mhm, yeah, yeah, yep, yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. And so that's the thing. And the solutions that we provide, maybe they're not your right now solution. Maybe it is a backup solution for you at another date, if things continue going the way they're going and, you're not having, you're not getting the result that you're looking for. But what I will say is that, this type of solution does tend to solve a lot of problems for a lot of people, right? Because you are able to get the number that you're hoping for. And, just looking at it, you know, I think the price where you're at right now, just compared to comparable homes in the area, I mean, I think really there's really only two options. Some people will say like, oh well, just get another realtor, right? Like another realtor can sell it. The reality is there's really only two, technically three things that are going to change the result of a property that's being sold on market, right? It's either update it, which, it looks like it's pretty well updated. Maybe there's a couple little tiny things that you could possibly do to give it a little boost, but I think for the most part, all the big stuff is seemingly done. So I don't think there's a lot of room there. And from the sounds of it, the cash reserves to be able to do that type of stuff is not really there either. So I don't think that's going to move the needle significantly, right? So the only other two options are either time on the market and wait, or reduce the price, right? Those are really the only levers that you have to pull. Pretty much with today's, technology and the internet, everybody that can see the property does see the property. So there's nothing, because I've had other agents, come to me and try to, snag listings that I have with an agent. They're like, oh, I could do this and I could do, have circus clowns and do juggling and all this stuff, right? That's going to sell the house. And it's like, no, you're not. You just want the list. If you had a buyer, you would bring them because you're going to get a buyer's agent commission. So why aren't you bringing your buyer? You know what I mean? So, I would say like if you want to move it faster, reducing is probably going to be your best bet. If you have time and you want to wait, then yeah, you can do that. Um, and then eventually, you should get a buyer coming in at that number. Um, if we were to explore like a solution that we provide, right? We took over the mortgage and then worked something out with the equity. Like how much upfront do you think you would need like immediately at closing? Hmm. 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 For sure. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And so that's a great point. And so I'll tell you, like, so purchasing subject to taking over the mortgage, usually they're the sellers that we're doing that with, there's some point of pain. With seller finance, really, usually there's a point of gain, right? They're looking to gain something by offering seller financing, and that's where we're basically upgrading them from a landlord to a lender, right? So so right now, you're basically a landlord. You pay, a mortgage payment, and if toilet breaks, they're calling you or your property manager, whoever, but you have to shell it out, right? But if you were Bank of America, or who's your loan with? Got it. Okay. So yeah, so when your toilet clogs, you don't call them up. They're like, "Why are you calling us?" Right? You just send them a check. Exactly. So that's kind of the scenario. And so there's a lot of times where we can incentivize it, but it has to obviously be a win-win for everybody, and makes sense for everybody. So for us, we would need to be able to take it on to where we could basically take it over, get a tenant in, and be able to get some sort of net positive cash flow like immediately as soon as we get a tenant in. If it takes us 30 days to get a tenant, whatever it takes to get a tenant in, but like we'd need to be able to positively cash flow day one. Um, so with that being said, I mean, I think realistically, the rent, we could probably rent it for just about 4 grand a month. And Okay, so yeah, so spot on. So basically, what we typically have to account for, and you've probably been paying this, is usually 10% for property management is our costs, and then we usually set aside 15% for vacancy maintenance and repairs, right? And so when we're looking at, 4,000 times 0.75, I mean, that puts us right about 3 grand, which basically puts us kind of in a, if your payment is 32 to 3,300, kind of puts us in a little bit of a negative cash flow situation there. But it's not terrible. 8%. Okay. So yeah, usually, so that basically covers vacancy maintenance repairs. So, the cost of a turn, the cost of the, 15 to 30 days between tenants that it take, because you lose a month's rent, so all these things kind of all compile up to about 15% for vacancy maintenance and repairs. You can think of it as CapEx is another thing they call it, capital expenditures. So that's 15%. So let's say it was 15 plus 8%, so it's 23%. So yeah, it's it'd be close to a break even. So I mean, a situation that could possibly make sense for us is if we could. I mean, it's I don't want to like. I'm just brainstorming here, so I'm not like firmly planting any flag in the ground or anything like that. Um, but we have done situations. So a perfect example, we had a seller who he was like a software engineer, and the guy was raking in like tons of money, but he was getting ready to retire at some point in the near future, and he had a rental property, so he was gonna have to pay like capital gains taxes and everything, and his tax rate was higher because of how much he made. So what he actually did with us was we took over his mortgage, his equity. He did what's called a silent second position seller finance. Basically, what that is was we structured it where there was he's like, I don't need the money. He's like, I don't need money up front, and I don't need monthly payments. I just want, I forget exactly when he was retiring. It was like 3 to 5 years. It's like at the end of, when I retire, my tax basis is going to drop significantly. That's when I want to cash out. And so basically, we structured a deal like that where we just took over the payments, and then there was a future date where he was going to get all the remaining equity, and there was a kicker for it, right? He was getting, we were overpaying for the property for that benefit. Um, and for him, the big benefit was he was going to pay way less in taxes on that money when he finally got it. Make sense? So, just based on like where your monthly mortgage payment is and where, the rent and all of our overhead would be, I mean, something like that would kind of put us in slightly negative equity, break even position. But, within a year, I think we could probably increase the rent to where, it's break even, maybe cash flowing a little bit. And make it a better situation. I mean, is that something that you would even be remotely open to if it was going to put, even more money in your pocket than just a traditional sale? Okay. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I gotcha. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, and you might be right about that, you know. I will say you won't have so you wouldn't have just based on like any income from it, you know, because it would be a purchase price, like it would be a principal balance. Um, there wouldn't be it wouldn't be taxed as regular income. Generally, like if you're doing like a seller finance. Now, if there's interest, then, you know, any interest bearing would, you know, the interest itself may be taxed as ordinary income, but the principal balance, you wouldn't be getting taxed like that. That makes sense. Um, so, but I'm not a CPA, so I'm not giving tax advice or legal advice. Have to disclose. Um, yeah. So yeah, I mean, it might not be an ideal situation for you right now. I would say it kind of sounds like you're leaning more towards just kind of holding tight for a little bit, you know, and letting the market kind of figure itself out. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. And just to be clear, in case I didn't like explicitly state it, it was you know, not necessarily being opposed to paying more than what you even have it currently listed for, if we can structure something like that. You know what I mean? Because and the reason that value is there, right, is because, you know, if we did something where it was, you know, hey, we're going to balloon you out your equity in 3 to 5 years, well, then, you know, we're getting value out of that time, right? Because it's time of not having to, you know, pay that capital right now. So there might be a world where you can get, you know, that type of return, you know, and it's secured by, you know, what is a insanely stable investment. You know what I mean? So just something to think about. But yeah. Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, because there's a million ways that you can skin this type of deal structure. So that's why I wasn't like, you know, when Bo talked to me, he was like, "Well, what would you offer?" I'm like, I don't know. I mean, there's, you know, I'd literally be putting a blindfold on and throwing a dart, you know, hoping to get a bullseye because there's a million different ways you can structure this. And so without knowing like kind of what your needs are and what you guys are looking for, it's harder to kind of make a firm offer. It's like, well, here's where we would be, you know. But I think setting some guardrails of like, yeah, we would want to be able to, you know, worst case scenario, break even with all of our expenses, you know, maybe a little bit of a monthly loss to start out. Um, that kind of helps frame, you know, where we can kind of structure some things. So, all right. Awesome. Well, other than that, yeah, I mean, I think you know, it's just that time of the year where things are slow. So if you're, I mean, how much longer do you think you would be able to hold out before, because you don't want to sell it with a tenant in place, right? Yeah, I would say, just my own opinion here, just based on our experience in the market, um, you're not going to want to sell it with a tenant in place. It's going to be way more of a headache. And you're going to literally be in the exact, because now you have to find an investor buyer, and they're all going to be looking at it through the lens of like, well, how do I make money on this? And you got a tenant in there, so I can't, because we all carry vacant dwellers insurance, vacant dweller and builders insurance. So, which means we can't do work on the property unless it's vacant. So it creates challenges. So if you know you're going to kind of come, basically it's a fork in the road. It's rent it and hold it for the 12 months that you have a tenant, or sell it and hold out until you sell it. Um, you know, um, so yeah, that's kind of where I would be thinking. Um, but yeah, hang on to you have my number. Feel free to reach out if you have questions, whether we get something done together or not. If you just have questions like, well, what if I did this? What if I did that? Um, happy to help you out. Um, the assumable, I don't know that you're going to get it. It's kind of they make the process for assuming a loan way too difficult and problematic to where it virtually never happens, you know? So, and I've seen them take as long as 9 months. So, mhm, mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess the question would then be, what would be some incentive for you to do something like this? Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, certainly. When is that time frame up? The 5 years, two of the last 5 years? Got it. And then you lived in it for 2 years. Got it. So 2022. So actually, so if you bought it in October of 2020 and then lived in it through, when was the last time you lived in it? November of 2022. Okay. Those 2 years, yeah. So you got 3 years, yeah. So basically November of 2025. Got it. Okay. Um, Okay, so that really only gives us basically 12 months from now for you to avoid that capital gains. Got it. Okay. Okay. So, yeah, so then the only way to structure something, um, let me think about it. There might be some other, because the other thing we did, a different situation, but the other thing we did with my house was we actually put it in a trust for the seller and then transferred it over to me as the beneficiaries of the trust. So actually, the property taxes remain the same as when he bought it. And in the future, if he ever, let's say he dies in 15 years, whatever the value is at that time, it'll from a tax basis look like I bought it at that value. Um, so there's a lot of like really crazy creative stuff that we can come up. Let me think about that more and see if there's anything else that would solve that problem because that's a problem that you definitely want to solve for. Um, and so then from the lens you're thinking of it through is like, okay, well, can I get enough over the current value to account for, an 8% year over year growth in the market, plus not take the capital gains hit. Let me think about that and talk to a couple of my partners and see. Those two things combined might not, there might not be a solution for that. At least not one that I can really think of off the top of my head. But let me think about that. And then if there was a world where we could solve both of those problems, uh, you think you'd still be kind of leaning towards just cashing out and selling, or what do you think? Okay. Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. So, but I mean, San Diego's a great market, and so this certainly wouldn't be a like, oh, let's get a bunch of cash flow day one. This would be more of a like, how can we make this make sense to where in 3 years I'm going to be happy with this decision? Yeah, 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 ever, yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, I'll see if I can solve those two problems. If I can't, I'll just let you know and tell you like, hey, I can't solve both of the problems, but but depending on, you know, how long. I mean, heck, if you're like, well, I don't really need the money for 10 years, property's gonna be worth a lot more in 10 years, and there might be a world where we say, well, you know what, we'll pay you 10 years value, or like 6 years value, something like that, but I don't know. That's yeah, there's more to think about there. But all right, perfect. Well, it was great chatting with you. I would say for right now, Bo's great at what he does, and I think just with the holidays and everything, I think if you stick tight, and don't get too antsy. That's the other challenge is like it's like I just wanted to sell, wanted to sell, wanted to sell. This time of year, people just stop looking because everybody's traveling, and it's like we have a property in Indianapolis right now that is probably one of the highest priced properties in the market. It's listed for $950,000 and it's been sitting for 30 days. And we're like, we want it to move. And we're just like, should we drop it? Should we drop it? The agent's like, do not reduce the price right now. Like, it's not going to do anything. You're not going to get anywhere. You're just going to lose money. Just sit tight, wait a little bit longer. You don't want to hear that, but wait. So, Yeah. But all right. Well, I won't take up any more of your time. Have a great rest of your day and give me a call if you have any questions or shoot me a text. All right. Thanks. See ya. All right. Well, it doesn't always work out, but I think there might be a potential solution that we can come up with. Um, Need to send a text. Oh, actually, hey, Olivia, it's Chris again. Hey, I don't know why this didn't dawn on me when we were just talking, but I just thought about it again. So really, we only have one problem. It's how can you maximize value to where you can beat the market at 8%? Because when you structure a seller finance deal, a sale has actually occurred. So you would be selling it prior to the 5-year period. So so now it's just a matter of figuring out, okay, can we make it worth your while? And that's something for you to think about as to like what would make it worth your while look like. Okay. Yeah, sounds good. And then I'm going to be traveling Thursday and Friday of this week. When would be a good time for us to link back up after you have some time to think about it? Okay. Got it. Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. So I'll put a note in here, just check in with you then. And then, yeah, think about it. You're not going to offend me with like, I want $10 billion, like whatever it is, I can hear it out. And then, if we can make it work, we can make it work. Mm. All right. Appreciate you. Have a good one. See ya. Okay. All right, guys, I am going to hop off here. I got to handle a couple things, but I will be back on probably in about 45 minutes to an hour. And then I'll do another live for another couple hours and then be wrapping it up. So I will catch you guys a little bit later.